Today I'd like to talk about mental health in terms of the negative paradigm. How do we talk about mental health when we're looking at things from the negative way of looking at things? And it kind of connects to what we were talking about, or what I was talking about last time, about false and true responsibility. Mental health's a great thing to talk about, and there's lots of different ways of thinking about it. It's not as obvious or cut and dried as all that. It's a kind of a thing we imagine we know what mental health is. That we imagine everyone imagines they know what mental health is. But what we can say is that there's two different sorts of ways of looking at mental health, as usual. The positive way is to say that it's a defined state that we can make a goal of and try to accord with. That's how we usually look at mental health, and physical health as well for that matter. And it's definitely more applicable than physical health, not entirely applicable, but more applicable. So when we're talking about being healthy mentally, the positive approach says, well, there is a particular way to be that we know about, and that this is it. This is being mentally healthy, this is being mentally unhealthy. And because we know what it is, obviously we have a responsibility in that case, because once we know it's what it is, and what goes along with this is also the obligation that we know how to get there, then good mental health becomes very obviously a duty, an obligation. Now, in practice, as I was saying in the last episode, when we use the word responsibility, it covers up a lot of stuff, really. So what it means is that somehow we've tacitly agreed that mental health is this or that, and it is a tacit agreement because we'll never admit that we agreed it. We won't admit that it's an agreement. We just take it for granted that it's a real thing. So we can look at this in two ways. From the point of view of the individual, I see my responsibility as being reasonably upbeat. Maybe not too upbeat, but reasonably upbeat. So I put a brave face on. I try my best not to look how I feel. That's my responsibility. Obviously, it's a false responsibility, because what the hell is that about anyway? I'm not really fooling myself. I might fool others, I suppose, but I'm not fooling myself. And that also means, and this is the usual way we are when we're feeling unwell in a mental way, is that we feel under immense pressure not to show it or to try and show ourselves as being otherwise. And we're very much encouraged to do this. It's even been suggested, or it's very often suggested, that if you fake it, then you'll make it. That's positive approach to mental health all over, that is. The truth of the situation is, if you fake it, then you have to keep on faking it, and it wears thinner and thinner and thinner, and becomes harder and harder work, and it doesn't end in a good place. But sure, who cares about that? That's what society is all about, the outer appearance of things. And from a societal point of view, when we look at mental health in this way, it makes everything so much simpler, because we can easily spot who isn't healthy and who is. And we can make an industry out of mental health. We can make a mental health industry, because it's all generic. It's all about getting things to accord with the formula for them, or how we know they ought to be, or what the prescription is, getting things to accord with their prescription. In thermodynamics, you could say that it's all about getting things to accord with that equilibrium state, which is a definite state that is an end in itself, and that is a real thing, and not something that we just arbitrarily decided upon. The negative approach to mental health is radically different, and we could say that the negative approach to mental health, the definition of mental health, is that it's actually related to true responsibility, and your true responsibility, in as much as it is a responsibility, and the word is kind of tricky to use without bringing any moral imperatives into it, is to have a genuine relationship with yourself, such that you're being honest to yourself, not necessarily to other people, because other people don't count so much in this. It's not about other people, it's about our honesty with ourselves. So whatever way I am, and that could be any way at all, it's not defined, it's not a defined state, I'm honest with myself, that this is the way I am. So this is wildly different, because it doesn't matter what way I am, as long as I'm being honest with myself and actually relating to the way that I am, that's mentally healthy. I could be suffering a lot, I could be feeling all sorts of things, but as long as I'm being honest with myself, that's mental health. This kind of corresponds to Ivan Illich's definition of physical health, where he talks about it as where we can bring an autonomy to our relationship with our own lives and how we're getting on in life. So Illich's definition doesn't imply that we be robustly and wonderfully healthy in a physical way. We could be dying or really sick, but we deal with it ourselves, because being really sick or dying is also part of life. So being able to relate to that autonomously and not handing over our responsibility for it is healthy. Ivan Illich's definition is quite challenging, really, particularly challenging to the mental health industries, to medicine, which for the most part operates by taking away our responsibility. We hand it over to the experts and sit back and let them fix it because they know what they're doing. But we won't go into physical health here, we'll stick with mental health. So this definition of what mental health is puts it right back on me, because I can't honestly relate to myself or how I am via someone else. No one can tell me how to do it. It can't be facilitated from the outside, because that defeats the object. How the hell would they know anyway? And as soon as I start relying on someone else to relate to how I actually am, I'm no longer autonomous, so I'm no longer healthy, and plus it wouldn't work anyway, because it will be turned into some bizarre kind of a fiction. So we can see therefore that mental health isn't as straightforward an idea as we might think it is, and it actually becomes the same as being autonomous or being aware or being conscious, and not living in some fictional representation of ourselves and our lives that corresponds to what someone else or what I myself want it to be. So as always we come to this, back to this thing where mental health is in reality and not in my own mind created fictions, which I can't see to be fictions, and which I feel absurdly obliged to try. I feel loyalty towards them. So the thing about these fictions and society itself is, because it's a tacit agreement, it's a fiction, because we're not actually being honest that it's an agreement. So we're not being honest that it's an agreement, so that makes everything compulsive, because now it becomes our duty to keep up the pretense, which we're not admitting to be a pretense. And very obviously this kind of business is the pure antithesis of mental health, and so we can say that being socially adapted is itself the pure antithesis of mental health. It's living theatrically, and when we live theatrically, to hell with how we really are or what's happening on the inside, to hell with our inner life. The inner life doesn't matter when you're living theatrically, and not even doesn't matter, it doesn't exist. And not even does it not exist, we have We don't even know that it doesn't exist because we have no concept, we have no inner life, and we have no concept that we've lost it. So that's a good definition of mental ill health. It's a very good definition, mental ill health. So when we hear talk about responsibility, it's always loyalty to the lie, which we don't know to be a lie. So because we don't know it to be a lie, we feel very, very bad when we can't be loyal, even if we really, really try. And so, to be suffering from some kind of mental health condition, by itself it involves an awful lot of suffering. But also there's a secondary level of suffering where we're feeling disloyal because we can't conform to the fiction anymore. So this whole notion of responsibility and morality, which is so implicit whenever we're talking about mental health, because even if we don't admit it, there's blame and judgment going on. And even if it isn't blame and judgment as we ordinarily see it, when we as mental health professionals are talking to someone who is suffering from anxiety or depression or whatever it is, we feel like they shouldn't be that way. And this appears to us not to be a prejudice. We think it's a positive thing that we want to help them, we want them to be a better way, the way that we think they ought to be, and we introduce all of our gimmicks and tricks and positive therapy stuff, which also sends the message that this is a way you shouldn't ought to be. So we're not at all honouring the truth of how they are, and that makes it very hard for them to honour that as well. Now it is extremely challenging to be with someone who's suffering and honour the way that they are and be honestly relating to the way that they are without any judgment, without thinking they should be some other way. It's very challenging. But it's not non-compassionate. It's actually helpful in a very practical way, even though it might not sound like it is. So that's the instalment for today. Thank you very much.